actually, the connections between the peace and cooperative movement are of long standing. But what is particularly interesting is that these ties have grown much stronger because of two important new perspectives on the conflict resolution process, on peacemaking process. And I want to talk a little bit about them. It'll clearly be apparent why the cooperative is relevant to both of them. The first is this. Everybody knows that conflict resolution is a political process. At the end of the day, it's the governments, it's the political leadership, it's the international agencies, and so on. But that's only part of the peace process. There's another part. The other part is people-to-people peace process. The interaction between non-governmental organizations, between people's organizations. This is the way to build understanding. This is the way to build mutual confidence. This is the way to develop joint endeavors which wouldn't exist if they had not been undertaken in the context of people-to-people peace process. If you look at peace as I do, as a march from enemies to neighbors, from neighbors to partners, from partners to friends, and I'll just speak for a minute about that. Enemies are people who shoot at each other or want to shoot at each other. Neighbors are people who live next door to each other, perhaps not in deep friendship or even in deep understanding, but at least they're not shooting at each other. At least they're living side by side with mutual acceptance. Partners are people who already have something in common. They already have something they share and they've built it together. And friends, of course, the word speaks for itself. So if you see conflict resolution as a march along that long road with all the in-between stations, then people-to-people becomes absolutely critical. In fact, in my view, people-to-people is the base, to use a musical term, the basso continuo, on which the melody of the political peace process, with all its ups and downs and backwards and forwards, is played out. And building this base of mutual confidence and understanding, but not only dialogue, but actually working together, doing together, creating together. As I say, things that wouldn't exist without this interaction, that to my mind is a fundamental aspect of conflict resolution of the peace process. You don't have to go far to see how cooperatives are a vital, essential element in this kind of a people-to-people process. And when I talk about this kind of people-to-people process, this is true of conflicts across borders. This is true of conflicts within borders. This is true of conflicts that have a very, very long history. And this is true of conflicts which perhaps are of a younger genesis. So from that point of view, as long as there's a people-to-people peace process, cooperatives, and that's recognized, as it is more and more recognized today as central, then the role of cooperatives, I think, becomes very apparent. But there's more. The second half is the link between conflict resolution and sustainable human development. The truth of the matter is that if conflict resolution, if the peace process doesn't bring a real change in people's lives, doesn't change their standard of living, their standard of education, their standard of health, it doesn't at least give them some better hope for their kids than they had before the conflict resolution got underway, then the whole thing rings very hollow. Then the whole thing sounds very nice, but doesn't have any meaning. Then it's very, very easy for hatreds which have been ingrained over years or decades or generations to bubble up again. And once those hatreds and those feelings of anger bubble up, the slide down to violence is slippery, and you proceed along it very rapidly. So that if you don't link, it isn't a question of thinking that linking development cooperation, development activity to conflict resolution is a good thing. It isn't only recognizing that every conflict resolution opens a window of opportunity for development. But the truth is that if you don't take that window of opportunity, you lose the development. You probably lose the peace process as well. But once again, if you want to build sustainable human development, and I always speak of sustainable human development, into conflict resolution as an essential core element, then you need the cooperative. The cooperative is one of your tools to do that effectively, to do that with the involvement of large sections of the population, to do that across a whole spectrum of economic and social activities. So if you look at these two new perspectives of how to deal with conflicts, how to approach the issue of conflict resolution, you can see the growing significance of the cooperative. Finally, I would add, this is true about conflict resolution, but this is also true, of course with changes, but it's also true about conflict prevention. That is to say, dealing with those issues which you could already see if left alone and left untreated, are going to lead you close to or into a conflict situation. So that it isn't only, as I said in another context, it isn't only that conflict, that peace and conflict resolution and building a better social framework, these are important parts of the lives of cooperatives, and that peace is part of the cooperative movement throughout its entire history, but also in the present. It's the other way around. Cooperatives are a critical and important element in peace process, in the conflict resolution process, in the conflict prevention process. And it's from these two perspectives that I look at the interaction and the relationship between cooperatives and